Welcome back. In a moment, we'll examine space exploration. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. 12 police officers have been injured during protests sparked by the police shooting of a black man at Charlotte in North Carolina. Police say he was carrying a gun and posed an imminent deadly threat. But relatives told media he was not holding a weapon, but a book. Gabon President Ali Bongo says he wants to meet with his opposition rival ahead of this week's court ruling on the election. Jean Ping has requested a recount following loss of just 6,000 votes. The dispute led to days of rioting, which left at least 6 people dead. And the former Brazilian President Lula da Silva will stand trial for corruption. Federal prosecutors are accusing him of being the commander-in-chief of a corruption scheme at the state oil company Petrobras. Da Silva says he will cooperate with the authorities and called the charges against him pure fiction. The launch this week of a new batch of space crew to the International Space Station has been postponed due to technical reasons. The International Space Station first launched into orbit in 1998 and can often be seen from Earth with the naked eye. Speculation about the future of the ISS has been rife since NASA recently appeared to signal its intention to offload the space station sometime in the 2020s. Insight's Sarah Firth boldly goes where many correspondents have been before to find out what the future holds for what is, for the moment, mankind's only home in space.
Well, the International Space Station could be up for sale. Now, speculation's long been rife about what will happen to the ISS in the coming decades. Now, the ISS has always held a special fascination for many people because whilst most celestial objects need some kind of telescope, like the Radcliffe telescope behind me, to be able to see them, you can often see the ISS with the naked eye from right here on Earth. Now, the debate about what might happen next to the ISS and what might replace it was reignited recently when a senior member of NASA staff said this.
Ultimately, our desire is to hand the space station over to either a commercial entity or some other commercial capability so that research can continue in low Earth orbit. And we figure that'll be around the mid-20s.
Now, if it does go up for sale, it's not going to come cheap. The International Space Station cost around $150 billion to build and took some 15 countries, making it one of the most ambitious collaborative processes ever. Now, the point of the International Space Station was to find out how to build and operate a space station in low Earth orbit. But it's also been used for vital scientific research and had some pretty memorable moments too. Take a look. At the start of this year, British astronaut Tim Peake and his US colleague Tim Kopra undertook an exhilarating spacewalk to replace a faulty unit on the outside of the station. Growing food in space is important if space agencies are going to fulfill their goal of traveling on missions further into the solar system. Here, astronauts can be seen tucking into space-grown lettuce for the first time back in 2015. And astronauts get a front row seat to the best views of Earth. This video shows the aurora, usually known as the Northern Lights, as seen from space. President Barack Obama has often taken time out to have a phone conversation with the scientists aboard the ISS in space.
Do you guys want to just mention some of the research and experiments that you can conduct on the space station that you could not be doing back here at home?
But it's not all serious scientific research. Even astronauts couldn't resist the lure of Angry Birds.
Launching Red Bird into space. Well, hey, we're already into space. Whoa, look at that. Whoa, all the way down.
Now, the theories for what the ISS might be used for once and if it's handed over have ranged from everything to being a platform for building materials to take us further into space than ever before, to perhaps being some kind of space hotel. And we don't know what's going to happen to the ISS at this point, but there is still life in it yet. In November, a new crew are going to be going up to the ISS, and among them, Peggy Whitson, who's going to be the first woman to have commanded the ISS twice. And if they need any inspiration for what to do with their time up there,
this is Major Tom to ground control. I've left forevermore, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today.
Sarah Firth reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss this further down here on Earth, I'm joined by Dr. Jill Stewart, who's editor-in-chief of the journal Space Policy. She's also an academic at the London School of Economics. This International Space Station, we have it now. What's the return on investment today?
Well, so the primary purpose of it is to do space science and science projects, and it's been quite successful in that. It also has hosted tourists over the years, not too many, but about 10, I think, with a price ticket of about $20 million. So, but it also serves an important political purpose, I think. It's the largest international collaborative project ever undertaken by humankind. And so it brings together a lot of countries. It's always served a purpose in building ties between Russia and the United States in particular in the Cold War context. And so there's both political and science payoffs for it.
And have they been immune to what's going down on Earth? I mean, Americans and Russians fall out, they get on, they have political changes, leaders change. Has that impacted the efficacy of the space program?
Most certainly. In particular, with tensions over Ukraine, Russia started talking about pulling out of the space station project. Whether or not that's explicitly political, there's also been talk about deorbiting the space station because it's come to the end of its shelf life naturally. But in my opinion, it also has had a political reflection to it. It's also, though, served to improve relations in some way. So it was part of sort of the peaceful cooperation between the United States and Russia at the end of the Cold War.
Indeed, the Americans totally reliant on the Russians or commercial companies now to get people and equipment up and down at the moment.
Yes, so since the decommissioning of the space shuttle, they're entirely reliant on Russia, which I think makes some Americans quite uncomfortable. There are plans to establish the United States' own manned space capabilities again in the future, both through the government and through private companies, as you say, such as SpaceX. But in the meantime, it's very much a codependent relationship.
Does that, though, add fuel to the argument which says, OK, we've done that, that was then, let's put our money elsewhere. Let's take some US government money and maybe boost the Mars program, for instance?
Certainly. I mean, NASA, for example, has a limited budget. Where are you going to allocate those funds? The International Space Station was long conceived of as something as a jumping off point. So it was part of the project of longer term exploration. So it could be a point at which we would then go on to Mars. But other people say we should just go straight to Mars or use the moon as that jumping off point. So there's debate about whether or not it continues to have a purpose and whether or not it should be extended in terms of its shelf life or if it should be scrapped.
There's indications they're going to get funding to 2024, I think. Is that, from an engineering point of view, when it ceases to be viable? I mean, bits start breaking.
Yes. I mean, Mir, for example, vastly went beyond its intended shelf life. So I think that it could viably be extended far beyond that. Mir did get a bit worn down towards the end, but you can improve upon these things and extend them. What's interesting is that I think Russia is planning to put up another module that will attach to the space station, but they're now talking about decoupling that eventually to create their own separate new space station. So whether or not we'll end up
a rival in a sense.
Yes,
yeah?
Yes, and whether or not it means that eventually we'll start to sort of physically disentangle the space station. Technologically, I can't see how it would be possible, but there are discussions about it.
I know the comparisons maybe aren't entirely valid, but you think the technology we now use every day from 15 years ago or something is unrecognizable, isn't it? In our homes, I suppose you might, over every 20 years, rewire it or do some things there. You can't do that in space, can you? You can't just dismantle a thing and install new systems.
Well, we're increasingly better at future-proofing space technology, so the things that we put up there, we're able to update. With computers, the nice thing is that you can update software. So it's not just the hard wiring, but there's also computer technological components that can certainly be updated.
And the medical research, which we hear about, was so valuable. Does that argument hold water? Can we actually pinpoint a breakthrough or several breakthroughs that are directly down to the investment in ISS?
Well, I mean, we talk about spin-off technologies, so things that we've learned that benefit people here on Earth. But the most important thing, I think, in terms of health for the International Space Station is that we've learned what the effect is of zero gravity on the human body for long periods of time, which is extremely important in terms of future exploration to further planets such as Mars. We need to know what happens to the heart, to our bones, to our psyche when we're off
Could you
Earth.
survive that huge amount of time in space?
Yeah.
And the answer seems to be yes, you could.
Yes, I mean, we're finding ways to counteract the negative effects of space. So it does cause problems for example, the heart. But because of the research that's been done on the International Space Station, we're increasingly learning about how to counteract those.
Jill Stewart, thank you very much. Now we end with our Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. And today, more outrage has been caused in the US presidential election, this time by a link between Syrian refugees and sweets. Donald Trump Jr. posted a message on social media comparing Syrian refugees to a handful of the little coloured sweet or candy called Skittles. Well, unsurprisingly, this was greeted with howls of protest on social media sites, and the company who makes Skittles, Wrigley, released a dignified statement. Skittles, they say, are candy. Refugees are people. We don't feel it's an appropriate analogy. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.